I was a volunteer coach for 5 years before I got money for it. My first job was my first official job at St. Thomas Academy where I got money was 1966. I was the B squad coach, the sophomore coach. But before that, I had volunteered for 5 years as an assistant, as a walk-on assistant. That was funny. I had come home from college. I was going to the University of Minnesota. I would go over to practice every day and watch from the outside on the north field of the grounds over there. One day Skip walked over to me and I figured he was going to let me have it, and he said, "Look, if you're going to come to practice every day, come around on this side and why don't you help us?" Because it was just Skip and Jack. There were just two coaches. So I did. I became a volunteer assistant in 1962. And I kept coming to practice every day at my own expense and with no compensation of any kind, didn't want any. And I helped 62, 63, 64, and 65 as a volunteer. My brother played in 64 and 63. So that was one of the good reasons for coming. I was a long-term student at the University of Minnesota. I was working on my bachelor's and my master's at the same time, and I ended up getting a master's. But I was more of a coach. I was coaching at Breck, and I was coaching in the Highland Groveland Association, where I coached Mike Barslow. And so in 1966 was my first official job at the academy as a paid assistant coach. It was also my first year of teaching, the fall of 1966. And I inherited a team that only had 9 players on it, and they were the ones who were freshmen on the previous B squad that Sergeant Max Bilke coached that didn't win a game and didn't score a point the whole season. So football was in the dumper, and I ended up with nine kids on my B squad, but I was a sophomore and freshman teacher. I taught the algebra, geometry, and some Phi Ed. I had all the sophomores and freshmen in front of me sometime during the day, and boy, I recruited like mad. And by the end of that season, I had 70 players on that team. And we lost our first game to De La Salle, 6-0, and then we won our next 8 games as sophomores with a really strong freshman contingent. There were so many freshmen on that team that I spun them off into their own unit. And we were so good that I could put them in by the second quarter. So we would run the score up a little bit in the first quarter and in the beginning of the second quarter, and then I could put the freshman unit in, and they would get playing time too, and I'd put the other guys back in the second half. So we had a strong group there. That group became our 1969, that was my first head coaching team, and that group of freshmen. And we were named the state Catholic champions by the Catholic Bulletin. In those days, there were no playoffs, and so you had a lot of polls around, and the polls, some had credibility and some didn't. It was whoever was doing it and how serious he was about doing it. That was Jack Horner. Jack Horner was the sports anchor for the local NBC affiliate, which was Channel 5 at that time. It's not Channel 5 now. But it was Jack Horner, and he was highly respected, but he was also a Catholic layman, and he wrote a weekly column for the Catholic Bulletin, and in his weekly column, he ranked the teams each week, the Catholic schools in the state. He loved St. Cloud Cathedral, and he loved Rochester Lourdes, and he didn't like us at all. So in 1968, Bill Ridley's last year, they were 8-0. They were very good. That's some of the guys that came to me in 1969. But Jack Horner picked St. Cloud Cathedral. So that was my first year, 1969, and I coached until my last year was 1989. Coached 21 years as head coach. Well, I learned a lot from Bill Ridley. He was my mentor and my model, along with an old man named Tom Feely, who helped me a lot when I was a young coach. From age 13, it was my first head coaching job, by the way, was when I was 13 years old. It was the baseball coach in the Highland Little League, whom I was the assistant coach to, passed away in the middle of the season. They had an emergency meeting to decide what to do with the team that didn't have a coach, and I was 13 years old. So I just sat in the corner, and the rest of the coaches and the administration of the league talked for a while, and then Feely spoke up and he says, "Why don't you let Jerry coach him? He's been coaching him anyways." Joe Rosiska he didn't know much about baseball. Well, Jerry's been doing all the coaching even though he's 13 years old. So I became the head coach of the laddies in the Highland Little League at age 13. That was my first job. And Tom Feely was, at that time, a mentor to me, as was Bill Ridley. Well, getting back to your question, I basically copied everything from Bill Ridley. I didn't create anything myself. I thought what he did was the right way to do it. I think the difference between Bill Ridley and me is that I believe in fundamentals a lot more than most coaches do. I believe that I'd rather have 11 good players than 11 fancy plays, and that good players win the games, not the coaches with all their brilliance. It takes good players to win, and so you spend your time developing good players. Ridley believed in plays and formations and tricks and things like that. I believed in basic fundamentals, blocking and tackling primarily, and the right way to do it. And so you remember the 8-second block drill, and you remember the corner force drill and things like that, because every team I coached for 21 years knew that drill, knew those drills. Those were fundamentals, and fundamentals are much more important than tricks and fancy stuff. If you have 11 good players, Ridley used to say, "Give me my 11 best players, line them up on the sideline, and I'll just push them out onto the field and let them figure it out for themselves, and they will win." That's true. That's what happened in '75. Those guys went right out there and they ran their team. That's one of the characteristics of that '75 team more than any team I coached, is that the players ran that team. It was a high character group, bunch of guys, and we were ready on Tuesday. We played on Friday and Saturday, and so you had a sort of a progression. You had practice on Monday, and you went over the other team, and then you repeated some stuff on Tuesday, and you practiced against what the other team does, and so on. And you repeated on Wednesday and Thursday, trying to tune it up. We were ready on Tuesday with that team. It didn't take anything to get them ready, because they were ready right away. And I couldn't say that about a lot of teams, but that was characteristic of '75. Skip McMahon, our athletic director, was a hard man. And he came to me and he said, "Got some good games for you this year," in '73. You open up with Anoka, then you have Burnsville. Well, Burnsville just won the state championship the year before, and Anoka was the biggest powerhouse in Minnesota at the time. Anoka, there was no Blaine or Coon Rapids or Champlain Park or anything like that. It was one gigantic school district. It started at the corner of Mounds View, and it went out to Elk River. I mean, they had over 4,000 kids in their top 3 grades. That's how they did the enrollments in those days. It was 10, 11, and 12. It was a 3-3 setup. Junior high was 7, 8, and 9, and high school was 10, 11, and 12. It's not that way now. Now high school is 4 grades. And there's a lot of argument about putting 9th graders in the same building with 12th graders by educators. They don't think that's a real good idea. But in the early days, it was 10, 11, and 12. Anoka had 3,938 kids in their top 3 grades. Burnsville was a great program because of Dick Hansen. And And so we had beaten them in 74, so then we had to go back and play them in 75 at Burnsville. And I was a basketball referee during the winter and a member of the Suburban Officials Association, and that was located in Burnsville. And many of the Phi Ed teachers and coaches at Burnsville High School were in the Suburban Officials Association, and I refereed basketball with them as my partner. So when we walked out on the field in 75 at Burnsville, the 4 officials were all teachers at Burnsville. They were the Suburban Officials Association. They were certified officials, but they were all teachers. And I knew them all because they had refereed basketball. So I figured we were in for a tough game. But we had a pretty good team, and that's okay. You know, we had the same situation at Anoka, and we pretty much stuffed them too. So one thing that I do remember about that 75 team that is a very, very unusual statistic. In our first 11 games, we played 12 games, and in our first 11 games, our first defense gave up 1 touchdown in 11 games. The first string defense. That's pretty good defense, you know. Now, in those 11 games, I'm going to mention this at dinner. In those 11 games, only 5 teams scored on us. Burnsville was one of them. They were very good. They were a very good team. They scored a touchdown in the Burnsville game. Rochester Lourdes scored a touchdown on us, but it was against our bench. And De La Salle, who was 0-8, scored a touchdown on us to make the score 14-7 in the 9th game of the year. So only 3 teams scored touchdowns on that team, and only one of them was against the first team. How about that for a statistic? That's pretty unusual defensive statistic. Now, St. Peter was a high-powered outfit in the state championship game, and they scored 2 touchdowns, and they could have scored more. I mean, we basically ate the ball in the second half. We gave them a little bit of infantry football, and they couldn't get the ball away from us in the second half. Frank Hamill, who was a great star, became a greater star in the second half, carried on every play, and we ran him behind Berge and Giefer and just blew them backwards. You know, that's what I remember about the state championship game the most. I put Ox in at right end for John Doyle, and we had 5 Division I players, 4 Division I players on our offensive line, and we just laid our ears back and we just steamrolled them right into the end zone, and we steamrolled them. They started out in that goofy defense, that radar defense where they have 8 men on the line of scrimmage and they're all standing up. By the middle of the fourth quarter, they had 6 men down in 4-point stances. They couldn't stop us any other way. We blew them out of their fancy defense. And Frank Hamill just took the ball on every down, and the boys just blew them away. Berg and McGough and Keeger, what a killer he was. And Szynski and Bebel and Slater on the other side. Doug Wardell, Snug Doug. Yeah, he was a tough guy, I'll tell you. He was a junior too, you know. Another memory of that great team, that 75 team. I sort of consider it a hybrid team because most teams, at least the way I built my teams, seniors sort of waited their turn as freshmen, as sophomores and juniors. The seniors did most of the playing, and most teams were senior dominated. Well, I inherited a small group, but real talented seniors from my 74 team to my 75 team. But it was a small group. But I didn't inherit, but what happened is we had terrific juniors. That state championship team was half and half. It was real good seniors and some really, really quality juniors. And when I say it was a high character team, I mean there was real character in both the senior class and the junior class. You think about the senior leaders were Berg and McGough, Garrity and Stevie Abbott. Stevie Abbott was as much a member of that team as if he was playing quarterback or fullback. He was like a Pomeranian dog. He just yipped and yapped at everybody. They came off the field, and if they didn't do well, he gave them hell. And if they did well, he patted them on the back. He was like an assistant coach. He was in my way all the time on the sideline. He was right there. I consider him a natural leader of that team also. But the juniors had some real leaders in there. Bob Slater was a natural leader. And Tim McManus was a very high character guy. And Michael Flood was super. He was from an athletic family, and then you throw in Bebel and Szynski, who were real terrific junior players, and Dougie Wardell, who was as tough as nails at center. So it was half and half. I had half juniors and half seniors on that championship team. So it was a hybrid team. Of course, they had pretty good sophomores too. There was this kid named Flynn who was real good, and Tim Hansen, who started at nose guard, and Joe Slater, who started at linebacker. I had the Slater brothers at linebacker. That's why I say the game, that team, they got themselves ready. They ran their own game. They even made up a play in the state championship game that we didn't have, and scored on it to pass to Berg. And they ran one of my coaching heroes was John Ghilardi at St. John's. I went to every clinic I could and listened to him. He's a strange guy, very quirky guy. But I learned a lot from John. One of the things I remember about John is that his teams always thought it was them who won the national championship and won the MIAC championship and won those games. They didn't give him any credit. You talk to those players, many of them who played for John and then played for me, and you talk to them, and they all think that they were the reason that they won. Well, they come and go, but there's only one thing that's there every year. It was John. And John made every one of his teams think that they were running their game, and that the game was up to them and not up to him. It was brilliant. It was just brilliant. And that was the closest I ever came to that. Closest I ever came to John Ghilardi was my '75 team, because they ran their own game. They did what they had to do, and they knew what they had to do. They talked amongst themselves, and it wasn't that they brushed me off or anything like that. But I was tremendously proud of these guys, because it was they did this. It was their season, and I was proud of our school, because we finally got the recognition that we deserved for a long time. And I don't know, I guess I was just out of it. I was really happy, but I could see it coming. It wasn't something that was a surprise at the end, because it was a typical St. Thomas game, and we played it the same way we played all of our other games, and we just overwhelmed them. I used to preach the word attrition. Attrition is when you wear somebody down by just banging on them, and you don't get anywhere at the beginning, and then if you keep on banging on them, one of the two of you is going to wear down, but it wasn't going to be us. I wasn't going to allow you to wear down, and I was going to get you in good enough shape so you were going to be in shape to take on any kind of that kind of physical task that you needed. But of course, this team was different. They were that way. None of them lifted weights. None of those guys. Maybe Bebel, I think, maybe lifted a few weights. I don't think any of the others ever lifted a weight. They were just big, strong, athletic guys that believed in themselves. When I watched that clock run down in that St. Peter championship game, as the clock ran down, all my energy ran out at the same time, because we had finally done it. We'd been shooting for this. We had gotten into the State High School League in 1973, and then we were denied chance to play in 1974, and now we were where we belonged, which was in the state championship game. And I was really proud. I was really proud to be there. I was really proud of my team, how well they did. Do you know that that team played the state championship game at 7 o'clock that night, and they went to a full day of school that day? And when my public school friends said to me, I heard that you made those kids go to school all day. We would have taken the whole day off and let them rest and prepare. And I said, no, they're at our school for an education. So they went to school, and they had 6 periods, and they got excused at 3 o'clock or 3:30, whatever the end of the day was, to get ready for the game that night. I'm proud of that fact. And it didn't affect their play at all. They would have just laid around and probably lost their energy during the day if they didn't have to worry about their math score and their English tests. And the teachers didn't help. They gave them all, Friday was test day, and they gave them all tests all day. So it was just a normal school day and a normal football game. I was lucky. I had good assistant coaches every year I coached, and that year especially. I had my running buddy, my close friend Paul Maloney was one of my coaches, and one of my good friends on the faculty, brilliant math teacher Mike Rongich, who had never played football because he had polio and his leg was crippled, but he loved football, and he was the smartest guy that I knew. So when he asked if he could come out and coach, I was happy to take him on as a coach on the varsity. And then the B squad coach was a friend named Earl Wetzel, who came to the varsity on game day to help with coaching too. Earl played for Bill Ridley when I was an assistant coach, and when I became head coach, or when I became a coach, a salaried coach in 1966, Earl was a freshman at St. Thomas College and asked if he could come on as my assistant for free, because we couldn't pay anybody anything in those days. I was only getting $300 myself, and I couldn't give him any of that. So Earl started with me in 1966, and he was a valuable assistant coach for the varsity because he helped us with scouting, and he helped with during games. He was on the phones. He's the person I talked to. He was the eye in the sky, and Paul was a hardworking. His specialty was defensive backs. He loved it. He loved coaching defensive backs. And Mike Rongich coached the line. Mike was, like I say, was probably the smartest guy I ever knew. And so I had to coach Mike first before he could coach the line. He coached the line with my techniques, and he was a terrific teacher, so he did a terrific job. But I had to coach him first. He knew nothing about football. He knew every permutation and combination that you could make out of numbers, but but he was brilliant and a hard worker and a loyal guy too. So that was important. My coaches, it was important that they were hard workers, and that it was important that they were loyal, but it was really important that they were teachers themselves, that they understood kids and could communicate with them. You see so many insurance salesmen and other part-time coaches now that are not educators, and they are not successful as coaches because they're not teachers. And it takes a teacher who's with kids all day and understands kids, and those guys were that. Earl turned out to be a very successful teacher at Farmington High School. He was honored down there many times as teacher of their year, and they named their football field after him too.
I had been asked to coach the baseball team when I was a senior at the college. And I said, well, I'm captain of the baseball team. I can't take the job. I'd love to do it at the academy. And I said, so then I ran into Father Roach. He signed me to teach at the academy the following year. And I was an assistant in the varsity football team. And Skip McMahon asked me to go down, take over the B squad. And that, I didn't even know who the B squad would be, sophomores, freshmen, sophomores. And but the varsity had not only us, but De La Salle or anybody else hadn't beaten Cretin in 10 years. The only school that had beaten them was Edina. And Edina was winning the public school championship every year. And then Cretin would go play them after the regular season and give them a game, but Edina was real strong in those days. I was an assistant coach on the varsity, and Skip McMahon asked me to go down and coach the B squad. And I did that, and that's where I ran into the Goldust twins, Barcelow and Cerisi, because where one went, the other one, you could always find the other one. But that B squad beat Cretin. And that's the first time anybody had done that in years. Anybody in the conference. They used to lose to Edina in a postseason game all the time. They couldn't beat Edina. Nobody else could either. But nobody could beat Cretin. And then I was an assistant to Bill Ridley at O'Shaughnessy Stadium, again, in a game against Cretin's varsity. And they were still undefeated against all the Central Catholic Conference teams, and we beat them that night at St. Thomas College under the lights, and the helmets went above the lights when that one ended. Well, the turning point was literally, we had not moved yet, but we were just about to move. And that was a big thing when we moved out to Mendota Heights, because there we had all kinds of room, and we had plenty of room for a B squad. Bill Ridley was the new head coach, and he had put in a rule, he was also the principal, which came in handy, that every freshman had to have a fall activity, okay? And of course, football was one of the three. I don't think in those days, I don't even know if we had a soccer team. But so all of a sudden, instead of having like 20 kids out, 20 freshmen out for football, we have like 40. And then the next year, that means we have 40 sophomores and then 40 more. Now we're talking about 70 to 80 kids in a program that used to be lucky if they had 30. That was part of the turning point. The other part of the turning point was that Bill Ridley brought a blocking system to the football team. It was a system of rules, and the linemen and to some degree the backs had to learn those rules, and I won't go into, it was somewhat complicated, but it was doable. And he had gotten that from one of the colleges. It was, other people were using it. But basically, some of those guys are probably here today. They could still quote those rules for you. They could, if you ask them what their rules were, you know, if they were a tackle or a guard, they'll rattle it off just right off the top of their head. They can remember exactly. And the older coaches, Skip, Wee Walsh at Cretin, Dick Reinhardt at De La Salle, they did it the other way. They kind of went, they'd stop a scrimmage and go over to a tackle and say, now who are you supposed to get on that play? And it would go into this tutoring, you know, stop everything type thing. That ended when Ridley brought in that blocking system. And I always remember when I was coaching basketball, Len Horiza was at Cretin. Somebody asked him why Cretin never played a man-for-man, and Horiza, their coach, said, Cretin kids aren't smart enough to play man-for-man. And I said, you didn't really say that, did you? Well, that was his sense of humor, you know, for what it was worth. But that was part of, it's a numbers. Football of all sports is numbers. De La Salle had more students. Cretin had more students. Later on, Hill had more. And when I say students, I mean boys. When I was at the academy as a student, we had roughly 500 boys and 100 boarders. We had 500 day cadets and 100 boarders. And Cretin would have 1,000 boys. De La Salle would have maybe 1,200. There was one year where De La Salle had to rent another building. They had so many freshmen. They had 500 freshmen, and they had to rent another building, and then I don't know how they weeded them out then and got it down so where it worked. But remember, De La Salle was the only private Catholic boys' school in Minneapolis, which is a bigger city than St. Paul to begin with. So that was, then we didn't have to, back before we had the blocking system and before we had the numbers, if we lost some key players, then we were at a disadvantage when we went to Cretin and De La Salle and places like that. Bill Ridley had come on board as the new football coach. I was an assistant. Jerry Brown was an assistant. And Bill brought a blocking system with him when he came, and I think that was a big thing. A lot of high schools probably didn't want to go in that direction because there was a lot of memory involved, different rules for different positions on different plays, but it worked very well for the cadets, and I think that was a lot of time used to be spent trying to straighten out the blocking, in scrimmages and so on and so forth. I can tell you that right now there are people here tonight that could tell you what their blocking rules were. They still remember those. I think they remember them in their sleep. Okay, so that was a big thing that Bill Ridley brought. And it was interesting because he coached up in North Dakota and Minnesota, northern Minnesota, and one of the guys he coached ended up coaching Burnsville. And later on, Burnsville and St. Thomas played constantly to go into the playoffs against two guys that went, by then Jerry was coaching the academy, but they were both running the same offense against each other. And frequently they went into overtime. Bill Ridley brought a number of things in addition to the blocking rules. He brought what he called the silent warm-up or silent drill. And it was classic because nobody else did that. And usually they were running around like banshees, so to speak, screaming and hollering and crazy. And we didn't march out, but we walked out at a leisurely pace, and we came out across the end line and then out to the 50-yard line, and then they divided into the 10-yard stripes, and then they went into calisthenics, which was also silent. So, and everybody people would kind of look and say, that's real different. And when we ended up in the St. Paul City Conference, Jerry Brown did that and really upset Kenny Maurer, who was coaching Hardy at the time, because Brownie took up the whole from the 50-yard line to the goal line to do the calisthenics, silently, of course. And there were some people that didn't like that. Another thing, at halftime, we would divide, the assistant coaches had to go to their group, whether it was backs, linemen, whomever. You went over some things. And then Ridley had everybody, not the coaches, but the players kind of would lay down, they'd turn down the lights, and Ridley would frequently speak to them, but it was about visualization. And I don't know if anybody else was doing that at the time, but I know there was nobody around the Twin Cities that was doing that. Most of the time, they were probably hollering at people, telling them what they weren't getting done. So the visualization, the silent calisthenics, the walkout, no running, no cheering, hollering, It got everybody's attention, no question about it. In 1969, Jerry Brown took over as head coach. I was an assistant coach on that team. Chuck Kelly was a junior. We went undefeated. We won the mythical Catholic State Football Championship in Minnesota.
Hey, freshman football was great. I mean, we had 13 or 14 St. Luke's guys that came out here, so I had a feeling of being very comfortable amongst those freshman guys right away because I knew so many guys that were going to be on the team. But the best part of freshman ball was being able to, all of a sudden now, the guys that you were competing against in the CAA from St. Mark's Nativity, St. Columba. These guys are becoming your teammates, and while the team ahead of us was undefeated, we knew we were going to be a good football team because we played against a lot of those guys, in grade school, in 8th grade. And so we knew what we had when we came in as a freshman, and there were high expectations, and we ended up going undefeated that year. So freshman year was kind of an interesting year for me. I played for both Dave Cochran and John Zobel, were the coaches for the freshman team. But early in the season, I got pulled up to the B squad. And so I was practicing for Coach Earl Wetzel, most of the week. And it wasn't until the second half of the season that I actually was able to come back down and play a few games and get a couple of games in, with my freshman team. So I really only played probably 4 or 5 games that year, but it was obviously an honor to be asked to move up with that class ahead of me because that was a great group of guys. Sophomore year, both those coaches, Earl and Chris Brown, great guys, great coaches. You loved playing for them. When you get pulled up to the varsity as a sophomore, that's an honor, and everybody knows it. And so I felt honored to be asked to suit up with, the 2 classes that are older than me and being able to practice with those guys. Plus, you get to run, some of the other team's offense, and you're learning what it's like to experience varsity practice and playing against guys who are bigger and stronger and better than you were at that time. The 75 season team, we knew we were going to be good. You have 2 classes there that had been undefeated as freshmen. I think lost 1 game as sophomores. You got a group of seniors who are really good leaders, and a number of them had a lot of varsity time. So, to be able to pick amongst those juniors who were, war tested, if you would, during games and game tested. And you got a couple of sophomores that filled in the spots, with Joey Slater and Tim Hansen. Both of those guys on the defense. I mean, we knew we were going to be a good football team. And, your question about competing against one of my best friends, Tim McManus. Mac and I go back a long way. It was hard, when Jerry finally had to make a decision to pick one of us to finish out the season. But the good news is we went and took a look at Mac in a different position senior year, and it all worked out. It all worked out. But Mac's a great athlete, and that competition started when we were in 6th grade at St. Luke's. So we were used to it. There was a lot of talk. I mean, the St. Paul papers were covering that game big time, and that first game against Anoka, we knew we were going to be in a war, and we were. I mean, the bottom line was we were, but we went over there. They were a bigger school than us, as far as the number of kids that were playing ball out there. They had a bigger lot to pick from, and it was a tough football game. But we came out victorious, and then following that up with the Burnsville game at Burnsville, so right away you're 2 games on the road. We had a war against those guys as well, and when you end up beating 2 schools that are probably twice the size that you are enrollment-wise, and you come out victorious in both those games, you knew you had a pretty good shot at going the distance. And I think that's really what set the tone for that 75 team for the remainder of the year. Yeah, so I was the punter, and punting in that Anoka game was really, in the first half especially, was really important. Field position. And, our defense did a great job of making sure that when we flipped the field, it played to our advantage. So ultimately, we were able to go score. If I remember right, one of our scores was a halfback pass. So it wasn't someone broke through there and ran for a long touchdown, right? It was a great play call. We had them set up. They were looking for a run. And Jimmy Bolin threw a great pass, and we ended up scoring that first touchdown on a halfback pass. So, great result. Turned out to be a great result. Yeah. So besides quarterback, and I really wasn't quarterbacking in that Anoka game. Mac played that first game, so I was punting. That was my primary role in that game that year, and Yeah, we ended up having to flip the field on them a couple of times. So it was a key part. But fortunately, we had a great defense that year, and when we flipped the field, the defense was able to let it play to our advantage. So. Yeah, going into the Burnsville game, I was really fired up because that was going to be my first start at quarterback that season. And Burnsville's a good football team. We'd heard a lot about them, but we were really well prepared. And the truth be told, we dominated that game for the most part. Not on the scoreboard, but if you look at it statistically, it wasn't until late in the fourth quarter that Burnsville actually made a run to make it a ball game. So yeah, it was a great result. And I remember a couple of those plays like they were yesterday. Throwing the backside switch to Jimmy Bolin, which was another great play call. We had set that up perfectly, and it ended up going for a touchdown. Yeah, so with Terry being injured in practice, during the preseason, Jerry had to move some things around. We ended up moving, Scott Wilhelm, he played some fullback. Frank Hamill played some halfback. Going into that Burnsville game, we used Dan Feely a lot. I mean, we had a pretty good makeshift with Jimmy Bolin as the real mainstay at left halfback, right? But we had a ton of talent, and every one of these guys stepped up when they were asked. So if you go back and look at some of those articles, you're going to see Dan Feely's name in there, and you're going to go, "Wow, I didn't know Dan was in our backfield," but and he did well. He did really well, So, when you've got that kind of talent, it makes it a little easier to be able to be the quarterback and know that the guys that behind you are really good ball carriers and they're going to get the job done. Yeah, so being one of 8 boys and having a dad for a football coach and had played, at the college level himself, you got used to high expectations, and so around the dinner table, the support that was there, the brothers wanting to see you do well was outstanding. But let me tell you, they were also your biggest critics. They'd let you know when you didn't do the job right, which was fine. I got a younger brother, Joe, who's 1 year behind me, and Joe was my biggest fan, but he was also my biggest critic. And when Joe talked, I listened, because he had my best interest in mind. The CCC was a great football conference. There were a lot of great teams and good coaches, across that conference. So obviously the big hype is always the Cretin-St. Thomas game. But the one even prior to that was the Rochester-Lourdes, academy game. And when you look at the record that the head coach at Lourdes had, he was looking for his 100th win when we went down there. We beat Lourdes so badly that afternoon that I think the confidence of our team just skyrocketed. And while Cretin probably played us the toughest in the CCC with a 12-3 victory, once we got past those guys, you had a pretty high level of confidence that you were going to run the table on the conference, and you were going to be, seated high in the playoffs. And that's exactly what happened. Yeah, so Lourdes being number 1, that was obviously added motivation. By that time, we felt like we were the best Class A team in the state. And we had something to prove. And we went down there and we proved it. 42-6 is a heavy beating. And, Rochester had some mistakes, but good teams take advantage of those mistakes. And we did it. We jumped all over those mistakes, and before they knew it, they were down 21-0, as I recall. And the rest is like I say, history. Yeah, the Cretin game and what goes on during game week out at the academy for that game is like nothing else. I mean, it really is. If you remember, we had a few visitors from Cretin that came out to the campus the Monday before, or probably over the weekend actually, and decided to defile the walls of the school a little bit. And that was just mistake number 1, actually, okay, when it came to that ball game, because the team was just fired up, and we wanted to make sure that there was no mistake in who the better football team was. So Cretan week and getting prepared for that game, that's the greatest week out here. I mean, the whole school is all fired up, and unfortunately there were a few guys from Cretan who made a mistake to come out and kind of defile the walls of the school, which just added fuel to the fire, for Friday night's game. Those guys ended up having to come out here and kind of wash off the walls of the school, as you recall. And, I remember Bill Culbertson, who was our dean of students at the time, made sure that those guys weren't around come lunchtime because they knew the football team would be out there looking to find out who was out there cleaning the walls of the school. And it didn't take long for that to get around campus, that the Cretan guys were out scrubbing the walls of the school. Friday formation, there's nothing better. There is nothing better than Friday formation on Cretan, the week of the Cretan game. The place is just rocking in the court, and when you get your captains up there talking about the big game on Friday night, and then the results of that game come post Monday morning, it's an outstanding feeling. And to take your arch rival, when you play a high school football game and there's over 5,000 fans that show up for that game, that tells you how important it is in the city of St. Paul and just the rivalry that we have with those two schools. Yeah, so we're halfway through the season, and I mentioned earlier that Tim McManus and I had been going back and forth, rotating every game. After the Cretan game, Jerry made a decision that he was going to go with one quarterback, and he decided that I would be the one that'd be starting for the rest of the year. And while that was personally, something that I had worked hard for, I felt bad for Mac because, I knew what that feeling would be like. But being the friends that we were, he and I talked right after that meeting, and I just said, look, Mac, it could be one play, I go down, you got to be ready. And, he was. And he continued to compete all year long. He wanted the starting job, and I didn't blame him. But going into the Benilde game, that was the first time I played 2 games in a row, and it was a Saturday afternoon game, as I recall, over at Benilde. Benilde had a pretty good football team, and we got a little bit creative offensively. We threw the ball more than I think they expected us to, and we had a couple plays that we just made up early on the fly. I mean, Coach Jerry said, "Hey, Mike, I want Bergie to run a hook and go." Well, we hadn't run a hook and go all year. And Bergie ran the pattern great. I pump faked it and just let it go, and it ended up going for 70 yards, as I recall. So it was fun. It was fun being able to play offense that way, and that wasn't the only game that we would come up with kind of an ad lib offensive play given the situation that we found ourselves in. Yeah, so Hill being our homecoming game and knowing that they were a good football team, we knew we had to show up, and so. As I recall, we beat them 27-6 or 28-6, something like that, and we beat a good football team. The only game left after that it was De La Salle. I think that was our last game of the season. We knew D was down a bit that year, and so Jerry did what a great coach would do. We could have dictated the score against De La Salle. We beat them 14-6. De La Salle felt like they won the state championship that game because they played the academy to 14-6 score. Nobody played us to 14-6 that year. So that was a really classy thing to do, and then knowing that we had that undefeated season, we knew we were going to go Burnsville and in the first round of the playoffs, and we knew they'd be hungry, and that was a war. Burnsville was a great football team, and when they take us to double overtime, the good news is we came out 6-0 on the top end of that game. But that was probably our toughest game of the season, by far. And that could have gone either way. Fortunately for us, it went our way, and then the rest is history. We take Hibbing out after that, up in Hibbing. Again, we got to go on the road. Hibbing's undefeated. They got a good football team, and the one thing I remember most about that game was we had a scout who was down scouting St. Peter. And when the Hibbing scouts heard that they were down 10-0 at halftime, they packed up their books and left. They said, "We don't know how to play from behind. That game's over."
Coming into the freshman season, I didn't really have a lot of expectations. I knew there was going to be a lot of people involved, and there was going to be a lot of competition. So I was just going to basically do my best. I would just say that was the pressure that was put on from undefeated seasons that we were going after. I think it started on our first game when the whole varsity team came over and lined up on the sidewalk and basically made a tunnel for us to go down to the field. That was just showing that there was expectations that we as freshmen needed to stand up to and really take this seriously as far as academy football. For the 75 season, as a sophomore, starting out football season, I was kind of a little overwhelmed that I was walking on the field with guys that basically are 2 years older than me, twice as big as I am, probably twice as fast as I was, and yet trying to hold my own to say I can do this and get the confidence to do it. Earl Wetzel was our sophomore coach, and Scott Macbeth. I dealt with Scott more because I was on the line. I think about 2 or 3 games into the season, Coach Wetzel kind of took me aside and said, "What are you doing?" And he kind of gave me a little talking to say that for whatever reason, I don't think you're playing up to your potential, and you need to start kicking in the rear end. Now, Earl used some different language than that, but all in all, it kind of gave me a spark to start really pushing it. When we sophomore year started to take on the bigger public schools that were very successful, and we started to compete with them and actually beat them on a regular basis, it basically told me that we were for real, that we could go and compete with anybody, and it basically lit a fire for not only me, but I think for our whole team. They let you know that as far as their expectations were concerned, there was really no reason we couldn't compete with anybody. And they made you feel that if we were going to go down, we were going to go down fighting. And they really put an emphasis on us basically not only competing, but competing for 4 quarters. And it usually worked that we pulled pretty much everything out. Having my brother Michael as the starting quarterback for that team was exciting for us. Being Michael's younger brother, I used to tell him that he was my brother, but it was exciting. It was a very good time in our household as far as all of us love sports. All of us were very connected to that season of Michael and being extremely successful as a whole team, and it turned into an event for my family. We didn't have 2 or 3 people at the game. We had 22 people, 33 people. Everybody showed up. It was an event on Friday night that basically brought probably not only our family together, but also the community of the academy. And it built a real sense of we can really do this. We can be successful and win this thing, not only as a football team, but also as fans and parents and brothers and sisters and everything else. So I think it really brought home the part of the academy that as a community we can win this thing, and I think it was a very exciting time. Playing linebacker next to Joe Slater was like playing linebacker with a Sherman tank next to you. He was as intense a player that I've ever played with. and he was tough as nails. And having him next to you gave you a lot of excitement to step to the next level and be productive. Behind Tim Hansen, Tim Hansen played nose guard for us, and to play behind him, he was like a wall. He was quick as a cat. He was extremely strong, and he was as competitive as a guy that I had the distinct pleasure of playing with two guys that were unbelievably competitive, and they really didn't like to lose between Mr. Slater and Mr. Hansen. My son, who is a sophomore, his name is Liam, to have that experience, now I'm going to get a little, but to have him have that experience that I experienced from a distance, my brother experienced, and to have the long lineage of Floods that have played at St. Thomas, it's special. My most memorable memory from the night of the championship game at O'Shaughnessy Stadium was that the team as a whole were going to win the game, and they did win the game. And it was probably one of the poorest passes that my brother ever threw, and yet Kevin Berg made a spectacular catch. I think that's the memory, because he used to throw a lot of very good passes, but that one was a little rough. So. But it all worked out, which is fantastic. So sometimes you need a little luck.
Coming into the 75 season, I'm not sure that any of us gave it a whole lot of thought. Given the fact we were high school boys, our attention span was less than a nanosecond in many respects. But we had had a really good year in 74. We had lost the Centennial, which I think everybody remembers pretty clearly. Never have I seen a quarterback sneak run so often in a game that was so competitive. But we were really good. And we came into 75 thinking, well, we're going to be pretty good again. But our worldview back in those days was pretty limited. We were, really small school. We were an all-boys school. A lot of us didn't know anybody who wasn't Catholic until we got out of high school. Thank God for Tim Hernandez and Steve Zachary. We had one African American and one Hispanic on our team. We were not a diverse group of kids at all, so our worldview was pretty limited. So I'm not sure we had a real good grasp of how good we could be. People are a little tainted today with all the media attention. They're much more savvy and sophisticated. We weren't back then. I think that my recollection of what my attitude was about our schedule as we looked ahead was it was exciting to play the big schools. Being able to play Anoka and Burnsville certainly was going to get us some attention. And back in those days, we were primarily, other than the Flynn family from the remote region of Apple Valley, everybody was from St. Paul and Minneapolis, the core city. So we really didn't have much of an understanding of teams outside the Catholic Conference. But I remember being very excited to play Anoka again, very excited to play Burnsville. We didn't know we were going to have such epic games with Burnsville. And then the standard teams we played, the Catholic schools, that they were fun to play against. There was a nice rivalry there. But I think we all felt very confident going against that schedule. We had lost some really good players from the year before, but we had some really good players that were going to step in. And we had a pretty strong returning core. A number of us had played an instrumental role in the year before, so there wasn't a lot of worry about that. I think when I try to remember what it was like to have my younger brother play with me then, and then Tim Hansen, who was our starting nose guard. It probably had more of an impact, Tim Hansen, because I was a little surprised by that. Oh wow, this sophomore kid from, Wisconsin he's not bad at all. For my brother Joe, it wasn't really a big deal because we had spent our whole lives playing on the same teams. And even though he was only a sophomore, he was pretty well accustomed to playing with older guys, both in football and baseball. So I don't really recall that being a big deal. We had just gotten used to always being on the same team, and Joe was always a year or two behind the other guys, so that wasn't all that shocking. At one point during the season, it was near the playoffs, and they did that article on us, where we got nicknamed Big Ox and Little Ox. And you use that to rub your little brother's nose in it a little bit, saying, I got to protect him and I got to do this and that. But that wasn't the case. It was just sort of a continuation of how we had always competed in sports, that we were usually on the same team. And so it wasn't that drastic a change. Timmy Hansen surprised us all because none of us knew him. He was a transfer. So it was a surprise that he made such a strong impression on us. So that stood out a little bit more with Timmy Hansen. I think and I'm probably speaking a lot for the guys we played with back then, at home, a lot of times it didn't matter what we were doing on the football field. We came from such big families. I mean, our parents, now you understand what they were going through to raise all those kids, but I mean, they didn't know if they were on foot or horseback some days. So as much as we might have been proud of our accomplishments and thought we were a pretty big deal, by the time you walked in the house, Mom and Dad weren't that impressed with what you did on the football field. I think one of my fond memories, though, is the parents really seemed to enjoy game night. Now I understand why they enjoyed game night so much, but back then, boy, Mom and Dad sure liked going to the games and things like that. But they got along well, they socialized with each other, and I think as the year moved on, it really was a social event that families looked forward to. I know my younger brothers and sisters, that might be a night where they got pizza, and that was not a staple in the Slater household, nor was it in most families' households. I think that how we all combined playing football at a high level with the heavy academic pressure or the emphasis on academics. I think it seems harder when you're not in it. When you're in it, that's just what we all knew. We didn't know any different. So none of us was accustomed to not having homework at night. We were sort of comrades in misery, I guess is what you'd say. You'd have a late football practice, you get home, you had to do your 2-3 hours of homework. I think what's fun to think about is we had a lot of really talented student athletes that we played with. Guys that really went and made their mark in society. They really were successful in their chosen fields, and I'm really proud of them for that. But we didn't know any different, and our parents certainly didn't give us any latitude to have an excuse for why we didn't pull our weight. So, I'm very thankful and grateful for having grown up in that kind of an environment. As a football player, part of our responsibility was to be a good student, to maintain good grades. And that wasn't just as a football player, that was as a soccer player, a basketball player, a hockey player, a band member. That was part of the expectation at St. Thomas. You were first and foremost to be a good person, and then a good student, and then a good athlete. And I think that really resonated with most of us. I have a hard time thinking of anybody that wasn't a good student. Some were really good students, and some were average, but they were still pretty good students given the curriculum that we had to tackle. But that was an important part of who we were. And that was reinforced often by Jerry and our other coaches. Nothing was allowed to slide. I can't think of a time when one of the coaches gave somebody an easy out from their academic responsibilities. If you weren't pulling your weight in the classroom, playing football was a privilege. You had to do well in the classroom in order to earn that privilege. I think that the energy, the esprit de corps, the school spirit that many people associate with high school football was pretty evident for us for a couple of different reasons. One is that we were such a small school in retrospect. Back then we didn't know we were so small. Now we understand that having a school of a little over 500, it was a little under 500 I think when we were here, that's a small school. But we were with our buddies, and to see whether it was Kevin Berg going up to make a football announcement or Nick Schneeman going up to make a soccer announcement, Mike Roundhorst getting up there to do something for the student council, you were proud of them. It was a commonality of shared experiences that we celebrated. And that's really what formation was for us, was a celebration of who we were and what our shared experiences were. It's time to blow off a little steam before having to go to math class or go to history class. My memory of the championship game and sort of the challenge that St. Peter posed to us, they got the first punch in. I mean, they came out of the gates quick, and they hung 14 in the first half on us. And St. Peter was a ground attack. They ran that wishbone offense, and they were fast. Their speed took some adjustments. When people say, well, what adjustments did you make, and this and that, our adjustments were pretty simple. On offense, I think it's well known, we went to the unbalanced line, and we just hammered them with Frank. And they just couldn't stand up to us physically when we went to the unbalanced line. And so that was a huge difference. We controlled the clock, we controlled the ball. That was big. We shut them down pretty well, though, on defense. And Joe and I oftentimes just played little games. We'd switch sides without the coaches knowing, and we'd kind of pick up things in their blocking assignments. And what seemed to work for us was we'd play Joe on Tim McGough's side, because Tim could absorb two blockers pretty well, and he was still effective. And, I just was able to take the base block a lot easier. I was bigger than Joe. I had a lot more body mass, so we were just trying to protect him a little bit from having that guard come out and get him on a base block. So he and I just kind of used our intuition to decide when we were going to flip sides and when we'd stay home. I don't know that the coaches were aware of that we were doing that, but that's what we did. I think when I think back about the coaching staff led by Jerry, who was the head coach, and I coached with Jerry for a long time, so not only was I coached by him, but I coached with him and learned quite a bit from him. The 75 season was, if not his best coaching job that I witnessed, then right up there in the top 2 or 3. And part of why he was so effective that year is he understood the culture of the team, and he didn't get in the way of it. And Jerry's, for those who are football fanatics, Jerry's always been known as a great offensive play caller, and he was a fantastic play caller. Nobody can ever take that away from him. Jerry's real skill, though, was team preparation. He knew how to prepare a team. We were so well prepared for every game. Every little nuance that would come up, Jerry and the coaching staff had prepared us well. And part of the beauty of that coaching staff was that all decisions came from the top. Jerry was the head of the staff, and everybody understood that and accepted that, and there was no infighting. And I've been on enough staffs to know sometimes, that's not always the case. They came up with their plan whenever they had their meeting on Saturday, Sunday, whenever they planned for the next game, and they executed it to a T. They each, Paul Maloney and Earl Wetzel and Mike Rongich, they all knew what they were responsible for. They did it, and Jerry kind of oversaw it. But the magic of that year was Jerry didn't get in the way of the players establishing the culture and fostering their own leadership and holding each other accountable and challenging each other and supporting each other and celebrating one another. And Jerry had an intuitive sense of when to step in and when to step back. And that was, as I grew older and in my own coaching career, that's something I always marveled at, that I thought he was masterful at. during the 1975 season. There were some superstars on this team, and everybody's familiar with Kevin Berg and with Terry Garrity and Tim McGough and Jimmy Boland, and the names are sort of embedded in our heads, but the culture of that team was really established and sustained by the non-primary guys. People like Steve Abbott, our manager. I mean, holy cow, Stevie had as much impact on the culture of that team as anybody. Tom Paulson, who I don't know if he even played a snap during that year. And God bless Pauls, he's passed on now, we lost him. He just got beat up at practice. I mean, he was on the scout team all the time, and he'd just plead with us, just don't kill me today. But guys like Eddie Keeger and Trip Hook, Scott Wilhelmy, John Doyle, John Crumley, Doug Wardell, they were so important in establishing the cohesiveness and the grit that we played with. Those of us that got in the paper and stuff like that, we got our flowers. But that team was really sustained by the non-primary guys, if you will. And I think that was part of the magic of that team. The silent drill is a custom, a tradition with St. Thomas football that, in my understanding, started when Bill Ridley became the head coach. Skip McMahon had not done it, but Bill implemented it. Jerry continued it. When I took over for Jerry, I continued it. And when Dave Zebarth took over for me, he continued it. So it had a good 40-year or more run of being in effect. And the beauty of the psychology behind it was twofold. One is it allowed us to focus in, get within our own headspace, and just, this is what I got to do tonight, this is how I'm going to do it. And nowadays we call it visualization and mental preparation, and back then we just said silent drill. It means shut up and think about what you have to do. What's your job? The second aspect of it is that it freaked our opponents out. Because in football, it's kind of the modern day version of gladiators, and there's a lot of whooping and hollering, and the louder you can yell, the more intimidation you throw upon your opponent. Well, we didn't hoop or yell or holler, we just were quiet. We just went through our steps, did our preparation, and it was really kind of a message saying, we don't really care what you're going to do, we're more concerned about what we're going to do. When I think about the traditions that were meaningful to me, both as a player and later on as a coach, and I think for all the players they're going to be a little bit different. One of the ones that I liked a lot, I love the plain uniform. The plain, generic uniform with just that white stripe on the helmet. It was simple, but it was classic. It spoke volumes about who we were as a community. That was a really important one. I think that the way we huddled and broke and went to the line of scrimmage was one I really appreciated because it was orderly, it was effective, it was efficient, and it was emblematic of what I think the leadership program at St. Thomas tries to instill, in that before being a good leader, you have to be a good follower. And by your role in that huddle, you are being a good follower. And then when you get to be a leader, you're going to run that huddle effectively. And that was a little thing that Jerry enforced religiously. Boy, if you were in a sloppy huddle, and anybody that played for Jerry can remember, whether it was burpees or running, the small details were enforced. And before Rudy Giuliani was ever mayor of New York, broken glass policing was embedded in us because the little things mattered. And you got in the huddle sharp, you broke the huddle sharp, and we didn't have problems with bad play calls because everybody was listening, nobody else was talking. So that was a tradition that I appreciated. I think that for those of us that played, things like the circle drill, it was miserable, but it sure is fun to have a beer and talk about how many circle drills we had to do at the end of practice, stuff like that. But yeah, there's a lot of fond memories thinking about that stuff.
Well, I was a sophomore in 1975, and we started the football season on August 12th, and I was returning starting quarterback from the freshman team. Now I'm a sophomore, and I fully expected to compete with the varsity players for the first week of practice, win sprints and calisthenics, and then be on the sophomore team. Well, what happened was on the third day of that week, Ed Bifolk was moved to quarterback. And about 15 minutes later, I joined Joe Slater and Andy Engel on the varsity. And then Tim Hansen would be called up that week as well. So 4 of us sophomores were on the varsity, and it was a life-changing experience for, I think, everybody on the team. We also had the best of both worlds because we got to play on the sophomore team. And that was fabulous because we were playing the varsity games. Joe Slater and Tim Hansen started. Andy and I were backups. Andy was a tackle. I was an end and a punt returner, kickoff returner, and safety on the kickoff team. And it was great fun being able to play on both teams. And keeping things in perspective, we were just high school kids. It meant the world to us when we were out there. We were focused. We were having fun. We were working hard. But it was just a small part of a long, long day, to be honest with you. But it was great fun. Jerry Brown was our head coach in football, and I had known Jerry Brown since I could remember, since I was 3, 4 years old. My dad was on the faculty and the coaching staff the first 12 years of my life at St. Thomas Academy, and he and Jerry coached together in a variety of different sports and capacities. I went to summer camp out here. I knew Jerry very well, and it was an honor. It was a privilege and an honor, really, to play on any team. Whether it was HDRA in Highland Park or VA in Apple Valley. But to get to St. Thomas Academy, get called up on that varsity, now you're playing with older kids, and they're making a significant impact from a leadership standpoint on how you reach higher and emerge as a competitor. And Jerry was holding everybody accountable to do their best, and it was important not to take it personally. But one of the things that impressed me the most about Jerry Brown was, and I saw this during varsity football for 3 seasons, is when we came back to school, a lot of us hadn't seen each other all summer. Because unlike public schools, we didn't necessarily live in the same area, same city, same county. So we hadn't seen each other, some of us. And Jerry would welcome people back each day. When we were stretching out, he'd walk up and down the lines, and he'd just have a conversation. Didn't matter if you were a good player, not that good, or a superstar. He'd stop and ask you how your summer went. Even though you knew in 45 minutes he might be barking at you and not letting you have water for another half hour, because back then that's the way they did it. But Jerry was an unbelievable, thorough, detail-oriented coach. And our film sessions, I'd put him up against PhD, doctoral people when it came to blocking. I mean, he could write a PhD thesis paper on football blocking. He could have coached in the NFL for lines, offensive lines. That's how good he was. Well, the discipline at St. Thomas Academy is inherent throughout the school day for a variety of reasons. Certainly the military is one of the 4 pillars. All boys is another of the 4 pillars. College prep is a 3rd pillar, and Catholic is the 4th pillar. And every morning, when I was in school here, you had morning formation just about every morning, and you fell into the brigade and the battalions and companies, platoons, squads, elements, all that. And so that was discipline every day, just about. You wore a uniform. And then there was also discipline in the classrooms. It's a college prep school. I mean, there's time for some humor and some time for some joking around, but it's a great place to learn. Your class sizes are usually fairly small to medium, and they do not let you go beyond a couple minutes of jibber jabber. And when that bell rings, some teachers are on board for 55 minutes, and you are learning and you are taking notes. And you have to have discipline. And the other thing is they know the teachers are real people, and they have time for humor, but you got to have respect. And one of the things about morning formation is the Catholic school, you do pray. And you talk about being contrite and having humility. and talk about servitude. And so you keep things in perspective, and there's a lot of discipline, but it's good discipline. It's not overbearing. It's very tolerable. I was very blessed to go here, and you walk here today, you feel very blessed. I grew up in St. Paul and Apple Valley, and I went to Nativity grade school through third grade, excellent school. Then I moved to Apple Valley Public Schools. Just as many National Merit finalists, if not more, tons of kids on our block, straight A students going to a public school, but that's also a very good school district. So it makes a big difference for your learning environment when you have discipline. I started freshman year in 1974, and the football season started before the school year. And the freshman football team at St. Thomas Academy had not lost a football game in over 2 years. So the expectations for us were to do the same, to go undefeated. That was good pressure, good peer pressure, and we had a lot of players, a lot of guys that made a big difference that didn't start, that weren't even second team. And it was a phenomenal experience. What was different from any other year at St. Thomas Academy up until that point was that this was the first year in the Minnesota State High School League. So we were eligible for the postseason playoffs in every sport. And so it was very exciting because the varsity football team had an excellent team, one of the best in the state, and there was a possibility that they could go all the way to the state tournament, whereas before it would be a mythical championship. Well, the 1975 season was one where we knew that we were going to be very, very good. And we had a very tough game on the road at Anoka as our first game, and a second tough game at Burnsville. We felt we could compete against those schools. And if we could get past those two with a couple of wins, or at least one loss, we had a good shot winning in our conference and making it into the state tournament. But first we had to take care of business on the road at Anoka and at Burnsville. We did go out there, we beat Anoka, we beat Burnsville, we were in good shape. We beat Centennial, then we ran the table in the Central Catholic Conference, which put us up against Burnsville again in an epic playoff game, which was 6-0, double overtime, could have went either way, toughest game of the year. Burnsville was starting their dynasty. They won the state championship 2 years prior, and when we left that field on Highway 3 from Rosemont on Halloween night, Coach Brown said, "Stop the buses. We're going to sit here and talk about Burnsville. And we're going to show that respect to Burnsville for what they just put us through and what we put them through." Before we even celebrated, that was the class of Jerry Brown. And then we started getting fired up on the way home. And then I'll tell you, the next week, we're getting ready for Hibbing, to go up to Hibbing for the semifinals. And Burnsville had signed, every guy on their team had signed with their name and their number and their head coach on Burnsville Brave stationery. "Good luck, Cadets. Go win state." So we're watching film of Hibbing, and I'm sitting behind Kevin Berg, Tim McGough, and Chris Bevel, who all went both ways. And they're passing all the signatures of the Burnsville team. And everybody's kind of looking at it, passing it on, looking at it, passing it on. Those are the guys that went against the same guys all night. You know, the tackles went against, they'd turn around, and that's how it was back. The guys went both ways. And I remember watching they all held that paper 3 times as long as anybody. And I'm watching Hibbing's film and watching, it got to Chris Bevel, and he's looking at, you can see he's looking at the guys that there's like 3 or 4 guys, and he's just, Burnsville was still in the air, and they wished us luck to win a state championship. That's class. We had some setbacks in 1975 during this season. One came during 2 days when Terry Garrity dislocated his elbow. And Terry was a leader. He was a starting halfback and safety, 3-year varsity player. And we knew we were going to have to overcome that. Fortunately, we did have depth, and we had other players step up. Scott Wilhelmy took some halfback snaps. And then John Ertl, Jr., filled in for Terry. And at Anoka, in front of about 8,000 fans, a lot of these people stepped up. John had not played in the secondary before. So that memory of John being back there untested, coming through under pressure, is really something. And we got out of there with a shutout, 14-0. Now, Terry did return for the Rochester Lourdes game against the #1 team in the state, and he scored on the very first play from scrimmage on a long run, like 70 yards. So he was back, and that was fun to see him back in the lineup. When it came to the St. Peter week for the state championship game, we were preparing like we normally did. And what was very memorable and interesting and impactful to me was that Coach Brown did a lot of things in practice with the offense, 11 on 11, that he did from week 1 all the way to week 12. And I would always run 3 or 5 plays with the first unit. And when the guys that were going both ways went over to play defense, then I ran a lot more with the remaining first unit. But what was really fascinating to me was, here we are, and some of these guys unfortunately can't even suit up because there's a limit on how many guys you can carry on the field. It's sad, but every coach has to leave guys off the team. And sure enough, now he made sure those guys got their reps, got their handoffs, 11 on 11, because they were part of our team. And I thought that was so cool. The biggest play for us early, at least in the second quarter after we were down 7-0, was a halfback pass from Jimmy Bowen to John Doyle. And that was a huge play because we took the first punch. They scored 7 points on us right away, and we were down, and they were fast and big, and they were tough. But that halfback pass, that got us even. Well, then there was another big play. Tim McGough, our all-state tackle, future Big Ten tackle, dropped their halfback, and it echoed off the walls of O'Shaughnessy Stadium. Echoed, and the whole crowd took their breath away. The next play, the same kid went about 60 yards for a touchdown. That's how good St. Peter was. That was our best shot right there. Well, that's okay. He's a player. He came back, good for him. Well, last play of the first half, Mike Flood, our quarterback, and Kevin Berg, through Earl Wetzel's urging from the press box down to Coach Brown, came up with a play in the huddle. And they improvised, they made it up, and it worked. It was a Hail Mary that he went up and got, shook 3 tackles, barely stayed in bounds for 20 yards, and scored on the last play of the half from the 50-yard line. This was a thrilling game. Second half, we forced a fumble inside, like around their 20, and then we took it in. Frank Hamill had 33 carries, 14 in the fourth quarter. He scored that touchdown in the third quarter, and one of the biggest plays of the game was the following play, when we faked the extra point, and Tim McManus, who had been our quarterback for the first half of the season, the holder, rolled out and threw a 2-point conversion, which put us up 21-14, which was important because you don't want to be up 6. You want to be up 7. And then from then on, we pretty much had them with the ground game. They couldn't get the ball back. And I think that was pretty much the plan that night, other than the Hail Mary, and it all worked out. But I think that Hamill was crucial, running behind Doug Wardell and Eddie Keeger on that left side, Tim McGough, Kevin Berg, Bob Slater on the unbalanced line. If we went right, it was Big John Szynski, Chris Bebel, Finland, or John Doyle. But with our halfbacks blocking, Garrity and Boland, but really Hamill, 33 carries, 14 in the fourth quarter. That really helped us put that thing away. We had a great crowd and just so much family support. And it was a big deal because it was only the second year that the private schools could compete in the Minnesota State High School League postseason. And so this was, a state championship that not only for us, but also for a lot of the other private schools. And, we would pull for them too. We would pull for the other private schools in the hockey tournament and, and other tournaments. So it was fairly significant in that regard, So it was surreal, and then the fans rushed the field, and we ran out there to the, and then I remember afterwards we went in the locker room. This started on August 12th, And now it's November 14th. You know, we've gone through like 3 seasons. The summer's ending, fall, and now it's practically winter. And I just, you know, I remember just thinking, wow, you know, we did it. It's like, really, this is a feeling of just an accomplishment together within perspective. I mean, you know, it's fun. It's pretty much what you see on TV at the tournaments. It's a state championship. It's a lot of fun. It's tough to do, but in all regard, I remember going over to one of my best friend TJ Ryan's house after the game, and he lived about 6 blocks from O'Shaughnessy Stadium. We caught the sports on the news, and you know, you kind of keep it in perspective because you got the sports on. It wasn't like it is today. You know, there wasn't a prep sports extra and a game of the week. It was the Vikings and the North Stars, and then we got, you know, 30 seconds, but it was a pretty big deal.
Our seniors were competent. We were confident. I think we took our lead from Berge. He was not the rah-rah type leader, and we didn't feel we had to be either. But we did know that we had to do our job. We had to execute well, pay attention to fundamentals, pay attention to details. These were all trademarks of a Jerry Brown coach team, and we took it to heart. We held our underclassmen accountable to excellence, and we held each other accountable to excellence. So that was leadership. It was leading by example. I don't ever remember any big rah-rah speeches or any type of, yeah, we need to get fired up and go beat this team. We just knew it, and we did it. As a returning two-way starter, what did I think about our chances of winning state in 75? Well, to be honest, I really didn't think much about it at the beginning of the year. I knew we were going to be really good. We had a very talented nucleus of seniors who all had very meaningful playing time on a very, very good 74 cadet team. Plus, I knew we had some just rock star juniors who would be moving in starting positions. But winning state, didn't really think about it until someone had buttons printed up that said, Tommy's take state. And that was about halfway through the year. And boy, then that became our focus, my focus. And it was hard really to even think about anything else other than, we're good enough to win state. Let's get it done. What was it like playing for my brother-in-law, Jerry Brown? Frankly, it was fantastic. What a lot of people don't realize, I lived with Jerry and my sister Pat for long stretches of time due to my dad's illness, and I saw firsthand how hard Jerry worked at his craft. We would spend hours going over game film, going over notes of opponents, looking at plays, and he also was telling me about how things would change in college. I literally felt by the time I graduated from the academy that I had the equivalent of about 2 years of college football intelligence because of Jerry. He was great. Yeah, how painful was it sitting out the first 4 games of my senior season due to a dislocated elbow? Yeah, it was brutal. It was awful. I felt like I was letting my team down. The one thing I do remember, though, is when I got hurt, I was sitting there screaming like a baby and hoping that when Jerry came over, he wouldn't yell at me and say, "Get up, you're not hurt," which was one of his sort of go-to lines that he would use when we got little minor scrapes and bruises. He was trying to toughen us up. I just remember thinking, oh, God, I really am hurt, Jerry. Don't yell at me this time. And he did, and he took a look and said, ooh, we better get him to the hospital. Yeah, in terms of halftime adjustments against St. Peter, I don't remember anything significant. I remember we were pissed off that they scored on us. We just weren't used to that. And there was this steely resolve that it sure as hell wasn't going to happen in the second half. We were going to shut them down. So I remember our confidence was being sky high. But I also remember Paul Maloney, our D-backs coach, may he rest in peace, telling me right before we took the field in response to my question, which I'd asked him just before every game and every halftime, Coach, what do we need to work on? What's the plan? And his response was, don't get beat deep. And that was what he said 100% of the time. But it was kind of funny because we never did get beat deep. And I believe, I'm not sure, but I think both Trip Hook and I each had a pick in that second half of the game. And for sure, no one beat us deep. That's what I remember about halftime and coming out in the second half. Yeah, what feelings did I experience when I scored the touchdown in double overtime against Burnsville? First, relief. That was one physical game. Second, it was just a great play call. I mean, the entire defense went for the fake to our fullback, Frank Hamill, and literally I walked around left end. No one was in 10 yards of me, so it was the easiest touchdown I ever scored in my life. What I remember, though, also as part of that was my mom screaming at the top of her lungs after the game when we were walking to the bus, telling everyone that number 21 was her son. And that was quite embarrassing. I kept my helmet on until I was deep into the bus. And then I also remember the next day my dad, who was disabled and frankly had a lot of trouble walking, but he goes to me, he had a great sense of humor. He goes to me the next day, he goes, "Oh, that play was so open. I think I might have been able to score on that." Wicked sense of humor. Yeah, my feelings as the final seconds ticked down and I knew we were going to be the state champs, I felt good. I felt that all the hard work had paid off. We expected to win, though, so it wasn't this like amazing, sensational, oh my God, we did it. In the words of the great Herb Brooks, this was our time. And after about halfway through the season, we just felt that we were the best team and no one was going to beat us. I also remember feeling just elation over Jerry being carried off on other shoulders. I was so happy for him and really happy for my mom and dad. They were so invested in the team, in the STA community. They loved going to games. They loved the parent parties, and I just knew how much it meant to my mom and dad. So yeah, it was a great, wonderful experience.
Well, I knew from the experience of '74 how difficult it was to win the whole thing and how much luck was involved. Frankly, we ran into some bad luck in Centennial game. Thought it was a bad call that cost us that game and an undefeated season and a good shot at the state championship. So in '75, I just knew we had a great core of guys coming back. Our goal was to win the state, and we talked about it, and we expected to have a good shot at it. So that's what we were aiming for from day one. I mean, even in summer workouts. So I felt pretty confident about our chances, knowing that we had to have a little bit of luck too. I knew that we flipped home and home year after year. We had Anoka and then we had Burnsville. Anoka we knew was going to be tough. I think it was the biggest school in the state at the time, and they were not happy about losing to us the year before. And I don't believe we had made a final decision on the starting quarterback at that point. We were still flipping guys, Mike Flood and Tim McManus. So there were a few things up in the air, but I knew how good we could be. And again, we just had a lot of leadership on that team and high expectations, and people held each other to those, especially the seniors. And so, I knew we were going to be ready. I knew Anoka was going to be really good. I always figured we were going to win, but not a sure bet. And I think it ended up being another really close game, if I recall correctly. What I remember about the Burnsville game, a couple of things. They were really good, and they were another really big school, and we were on their field. And they were openly talking about targeting me. I could hear them, let's get 89, let's get 89. We're going to take them down. They were talking some smack in the field. Jimmy Boland had a really good game. I remember that. I also remember Bob Slater-Ox really emerging as a leader of the defense in that game. I think he started calling some of the signals at one point because Jerry just let him, and he would make adjustments on the field, and he was a heck of a smart football player, and that's one of the things that I remember about that game is he really kind of took over and led the defense. Yeah, they woke up and they played like we expected them to play at the end. They put on a long drive. And, as I said, Bob Slater had kind of taken over the leadership of the defense, and he made a gutsy call right down by our goal line. I think it was 4th down, and we stopped them. And again, I say, you don't realize how close you come to not winning the state until you look back at some of these moments. And we just had the right guy step up, So getting ready for the Centennial game, they had beaten us the year before and kind of spoiled our chance at a state championship. So we were quite serious about being ready to play them on our home field. And if I recall, we played pretty well that game. So our preparation was not extra tough or extra thorough. We just did what we always did. And some of our really good players really came through in that game and stood out. And they were not as good as the year before, and they weren't up to us that year. So the alternating quarterbacks, like we talked about I didn't think it was controversial, or we didn't really even give it that much thought, because we had two really good quarterbacks, both really good athletes. Different in their, I think Mike was probably a better passer. Tim was probably a better runner, but a little more athletic, a little quicker. But they each had their strengths, and they each found ways to help us win. So the Lourdes game, I remember quite well, because they were ranked number 1, I believe, and we probably thought we should be ranked number 1. So there's a little bit of resentment there. We're playing down there. I think the score ended up 43-2. I think they got a safety or something at the end, but there were a few turnovers, which really helped us run up some numbers. We played really well on offense. I think we had some special teams, kick return, and the rest of the details escape me, except that Lourdes' time at number 1 ended. Cretin, our senior year, I thought played us about as tough as anybody, to be honest. Tougher than I thought they would. Back then, I had a lot of close friends at Cretin. I think it's a little different nowadays. We all had a lot of close friends at Cretin, guys that we went to grade school with. A few of us would go to St. Thomas, the rest would go to Cretin. So it was a pretty intense rivalry, and the winner had bragging rights, and the losers didn't enjoy it very much, because they had to put up with that pretty much year round. But I remember Cretin played us pretty tough, and we just kind of wore them down. We played well on defense, and they played well on defense too. So we didn't have a lot of points, if I recall correctly, but we did what we needed to do to win. Both my mom and my dad, and I'm sure a lot of other moms and dads, were really heavily involved and invested in the year. And my dad, I think it was his idea to do the yearbook, the little, big long yearbook, which was awesome. I mean, I still have a few copies, and they did a great job on it, and it's a great thing to help us remember 50 years later, which my dad was the type of guy who thought ahead and could see things out in the future, and he knew this would be an important memento for us. And a lot of fathers were involved, and moms. After the games, they would have parties among the parents, and it got to be a pretty important social network for them. And that all lent to the team thing that we had that was so special that year, I think. So Jerry had film sessions for the parents. I believe it was open to both parents. I don't know whether moms ever came, and the word I got back was he didn't spare anybody. He was just like he was with the players. If your kid screwed up, you were going to hear about it at the film session. And if he had a great play, you'd hear about that too. Because Jerry was very frank and honest about how people performed on the field, and I know he was the same way with the dads, because I heard my dad talked about it. He goes, geez, Jerry's pretty, straightforward and blunt about it. They go, well, yeah, that's how he is, that's what makes us better. Yeah, we're at Benilde, and they were pretty good, and I think it was early in the game, and I think Mike and I kind of made the play up a little bit in the huddle. So we ran a lot of hook routes, and then we'd run a hook and go where I would hook and the back would come out of the backfield and go down the sidelines and hope the safety sucked up. And so I'm sure they were waiting for that. And so I, instead of having the back go up the sidelines, I faked like I was turning around, and then I went up the sidelines and fluttered through the perfect pass. And I think it was 60, 70 yards. And that was fairly early in the game. And we had a defense that allowed us to try stuff like that, because our defense, we just didn't give up points. So if we made a mistake on offense, or if we took a risk and it didn't pay off, the downside was not great because our defense was so good that was our safety net. Hill Murray was always good. They had some really great athletes and good coaching, and so we knew they were going to be tough. I remember the game because I think it was the only game my senior year that I got yelled at by Jerry, because I lost contain on a play that I should have made the tackle on, and it ended up going for some distance, and he let me know at halftime that I needed to play better, let's say it that way. But again, our defense basically played good. We had to stop a kid named Whistler. He was a really good athlete and a back, and we shut him down, and they had a pretty good quarterback. And again, the defense was the name of the game, and we scored enough on offense. We played well to win. Back then we had 3 coaches, Jerry and Mike Rongich and Paul Maloney. And they were tremendous coaches, very different. They were like 3 points on a triangle, different personalities. Maloney was really funny, lots of side jokes. And Mike Rongich was, very straightforward and serious, and but he had a sense of humor too. But they were great to play for, and they coached offense and defense. The line and the backs on both. A little simpler than today's game, but they were tremendous coaches, and they made the game simple, particularly on defense. They made the game simple. Maloney made the game simple. We didn't have complicated coverages. We had 2 or 3 different coverages, and don't get beat deep. I mean, it was pretty simple, and same up front on defense. So I think we're deeply indebted to those 2 assistants who carried a lot of weight. And of course, Jerry, he's a legend. He changed my life. He changed a lot of guys' lives. He taught me how to compete and how to toughen up a little bit. I was just a soft kid from Highland Park. He put a little tough coating on me without overdoing it. And he trusted us. I think he trusted us. When I coached for a long time, we deemed the season a success if the team took ownership of the team, instead of relying on the coaches to tell them what to do and to be the motivating force. When the team took that over and the team owned the team, that was a success. And that's what we had my senior year in '75. The team took ownership, and Jerry was smart enough to step back a little bit and let that happen. Let the leaders arise, leaders rise up and emerge and take ownership of that team. And that I think is what made the difference in our season. So we were playing De La Salle, and they're going through a tough time. They hardly, I don't know how many kids they had out for their team. I know they had to have some guys playing both ways, so there weren't many. And Jerry took the opportunity to teach us a little bit about class, and the starters did not play. And we had an undefeated season at stake, so I was a little worried, and some of us were a little worried. But again, it's about trusting your teammates, you know. And it was a little nerve-wracking when the game was still close at the half and into the third quarter. But, you know, Jerry was kind of stubborn about it, and he did not put the starters in, and we won the game. But De La Salle, I think, felt good about the result, and that's great. You know, that's great as long as we won. If we won by one, that's great. But it was a little bit nerve-wracking partway through the game. But it turned out we could have opened the spigot at any point, but Jerry held off longer than I expected, which, you know, turned out just fine. They were good, and they ran the option. I think it was a split T option, if I remember right. They had two really good backs. Rick Lager, who ended up going to the U, and Straka, who ended up being a real star in the MIAC, and Baker, the quarterback, heck of an athlete. So they were tough, and you can't practice against that. I mean, you can, but you can't simulate it like the way they were so fast and executed so well that I think we were kind of in a little bit of shock in the first half, and you know, we gave up a couple of uncharacteristic touchdowns, right? Because they were out executing us, and we were behind, I think, 14-7 right before the half. And, you know, this is a play people talk about. I mean, we'd been running, we ran a backside post all the time when we run a sprint out to the right, and I played left end. And so in the huddle, Flutter gets down on his knees. He goes, okay, they've seen this a bunch of times. What you're going to start with the post and then break to the corner. So just run a post corner, and hopefully they suck in on it. And so I ran the post corner. Flutter threw kind of a fluttery ball, and I had to go up for it. And unfortunately, the two St. Peter defensive backs ran into each other and kind of knocked each other off the ball. So I was able to jump up and get the ball, ran down the sidelines. Steve Abbott, our manager, can attest to the fact that I stayed in bounds all the way, because everybody I run into from St. Peter says, you ran out of bounds, didn't you? And I go, no, I didn't. So we scored. Dan Goodman missed the extra point again. And so we were only down 14-13. We were still down at half. People forget that. But we figured some things out at half. Jerry shifted Ox to the other side, where they were having some success with the dive play. And we did a couple other adjustments and basically shut them down in the second half. And then Frank Hamill, we just pounded him. They played the radar defense with everybody standing up. We finally figured out the way to beat that is to just pound it. You know, you just go between the tackles, and that's what we did for the rest of the game. And fortunately scored one more touchdown, and we were able to hold on to the ball for most of the half and won the state championship. We earned it. Those three teams we beat at the end of the season were really good, really good. But we were pretty good too.
Oh, I thought our chances of winning the state championship were good, but it's hard to do it. And because we had lost the year before, I think when we lost to Centennial on a freak play, that was my sophomore year, and I wasn't playing then, but we had lost to them, and then you were out of the computer ranking because not everybody got in the playoffs back then. So if you lost a game in the state of Minnesota, you were out of the rankings. So, you know, anything can happen, but we were good. We had a bunch of good guys. So, and we did, none of us lost any games when we were freshmen. So we were pretty good. I thought we had a shot at it if nothing crazy happened. So our first game of the year in that 75 season was against Anoka up there. They were the biggest high school, I think, enrollment-wise in the state of Minnesota. It's a great venue, the Tornado Bowl or something like that they call it, the Halloween Bowl. Yeah, the Halloween Bowl. And great venue. It's my first game as a varsity player, and I'm on the kickoff team. I don't remember whether we kicked off to begin the game or not, but yeah, to come away with a win there was unbelievable, because that's when I think we knew we were pretty good, because they were big and they had a well-known name in the state of Minnesota in the football deal, and we went up there and we beat them. So the preparation for the games, that's one of the reasons I think that we were as successful as we were, the preparation that the coaches gave us, and the second string and third string guys their heads were in it. I mean, we were in it. We practiced hard all week, and it was kind of drilled into us that, hey, if somebody goes down, you got to step up and be ready. So for me, at least, it was, I better know exactly what I'm doing. I better know what the coverages are. I better know what the calls are. I better know, what they're trying to do. And but they did a good job. Paul Maloney was great, and he did a great job of getting us ready. But I think that one of the keys to our success as a team were the second and third string guys were, like, we were in there. I mean, we were ready to go, and we were paying attention in practice, and we were working hard, and we were practicing hard. So I think that was a pretty big key to what we did there. So the first week of school junior year was the week that we were playing Burnsville, our second game of the year, and they were another big school, another power in football. And to be honest with you, the balance between schoolwork and getting ready for the game tilted pretty far in the direction of getting ready for the game. I didn't really think too much about the schoolwork that week, because we knew we were going to have our hands full with those guys. So I didn't really think, looking back on it, I don't think I thought too much about school. I was thinking about the game. Right at the end of the game there, they drove down the field, and Bob Slater, who was as good as anybody out there, he and Kevin and some of those other guys, and Joe, his brother, was a sophomore. And Bob called the double blitz, and we ended the game. Bob was known for calling his own stuff sometimes, because he had a good feel for what was going on in the game. He did that when we were seniors too. He'd just call something or tell me to do something in the back when he was going to do something special up front. So that wasn't that big of a surprise that he did that, but to beat those guys, and on top of beating Anoka, then it's like, okay, we're pretty good here. I mean, these are two really good teams that we just beat, and on the road, and then you start thinking, we're pretty good. I mean, we were excited as heck on the sidelines, jumping up and down and going crazy, because you get pretty nervous. When you're not in the game, you get nervous. Sitting on the sideline, I think you get more nervous than playing in the game. So it was a relief to stop them there, but it was a thrill. I mean, I knew we were pretty good then. So our third game was against Centennial at the college, at St. Thomas. It was the college then, now it's the university. And they had pretty much knocked us out of the playoffs the year before. We had a late fumble in the game, and we should have won it probably. But and that was the first time that I got into a game other than on special teams, which was an unbelievable thrill. And playing at the college was so awesome. I mean, that was our home field. Such a great place to play on Friday night there, and everybody in the world's there. And I made a play on special teams in that game when a guy broke away on the kickoff, and I chased him down, and I dove, and I hit one of his ankles and knocked him down at about the 10-yard line. The play got called back because they had a penalty, but I think it took all the any nervousness that I would have had out of it. And what a riot to play. I mean, I had played, I think I started 4 games as a sophomore, but then, I wasn't starting and I hadn't been in the regular game in the first 2 games. So to get in there and actually be on every play and being on every down, that was a riot, especially in that setting with the people there and the, just the whole thing on Friday night. It was pretty awesome. The week before games at the Berg household was it was pretty intense. My mom and dad were both athletes in their own right. My mom was probably the best athlete in the house, and we always say that. She was a great swimmer and a great volleyball and basketball player, and they were great sports parents. They didn't get too involved, but they were always at the games, and they were awesome. They didn't say much before the games. We were pretty quiet. We left Kevin alone because Kevin kind of just went into his own shell there to just get ready for it. And so we were just pretty quiet. I mean, my younger brothers would, get fired up about, hey, you guys got to beat these guys and everything. And we'd talk about it a little bit, but we just kind of left Kevin to his own devices there. So he could get ready in his own way. He always played, I think, before the game. He played a little all along the watchtower. I think that was his get ready, Jimi Hendrix get ready theme. So we always did that. And but yeah, we talk about it a little bit, but we knew what we had to do, and I think Kevin just knew what he had to do because he was the leader and everything else. So our 5th game was against Rochester Lourdes, and they were rated number 1 in the state, and it was the second team that we played so far that was rated number 1 in the state when we played them. We were number 2, I believe, in the computer rankings that they had, and we were going down there. It was a Saturday afternoon, and it was our first kind of longer road trip on the bus, and that was pretty cool. Just the vibe on the bus, the energy that was on the bus was it was pretty intense. Getting ready for it, you could tell guys were concentrating pretty hard, and so it's like, okay, let's see another test to see how good we are, and we just pounded them. We pounded them like 48-0, I think, or 48-6 or something, and it was boy, after that game, it's like, okay, those guys were number 1, and we were quite a ways ahead of those guys as far as where I thought our team was compared to that team. Not that they weren't any good, but you could tell we were really good then. So the next week was the Cretan week after we had beat Lourdes, and we had been alternating quarterbacks back and forth in the first 5 games of the year, and between Tim McManus and Mike Flood, and they were, grade school buddies. They had known each other growing up, and they were good buddies and teammates. And but they were going back and forth, and the Cretan game ended up being Flutter's turn to play quarterback, and I think that was the last time that we rotated. I think Mike played quarterback the rest of the year in those games. And the Cretan week's always extraordinary. They're our arch rival. We grew up with guys who went there at the same time we were going to St. Thomas, guys who played at Cretan, who we played against, our buddies growing up. And that was another game at St. Thomas University at the college stadium. It's a great place to play, and it was a tough game. I mean, it was as tough of a game. I think I thought we would beat them worse than that. I didn't know how good they would be, but they were fired up for it. Cretan was fired up for it, and we ended up 12-3. I think we beat them, but that was as tough of a game, until the playoffs. I think that we had there. Those guys were they were ready for us. It's a big rivalry for them too, and they were pretty fired up. But we prevailed there. But it was tight. It was tough. So the Cretan had a guy who returned kicks for him named Jay Mountain. And he was, I knew Jay, not really well, but I knew him. I mean, we hung around with some of the same guys. And I knew that he was faster than lightning. He ended up getting a Big Ten track scholarship, and we ran track against him. My junior and senior year, we ran against him. But I knew he was faster than lightning, and so I had my eye on him. I mean, and I was the arrow on the kickoff, so I got to go right to the ball. I didn't have to stay in my lane. I just didn't want him, to go up there and then him go blowing by me. So it's a little more caution. There was a little more caution with Jay because I knew he could fly. So I was a little more just maybe I better not just go running down there crazy. I better get my feet underneath me if I'm going to get around him. So that team, there was a bunch of special relationships on that team. And there was a bunch of special guys. And especially to me, because I knew the guys who were my class, Frank Hamill, Mike Mann, Bob Zeiton, John Ertl, Mike Bradford, the guys who were in my class, just because they had been in my class for 3 years with me. But I didn't know the upperclassmen that well, Some of Kevin's buddies I knew, but to get to know guys like Eddie Keeger and Kevin Kelly, and to get to know Tim McGough better. And these guys who I had looked up to, because they were a year older than us, and I thought they were all pretty cool guys when I, coming through high school. And then to be their teammate and to have them treat you like a teammate as their equal was extraordinary. And it helped, those guys helped build this camaraderie. Those seniors helped build this camaraderie with the underclassmen. They didn't make you feel like an underclassman, like you did all day during school, but then out on the practice field and during the game, they were your equal. And so to build those relationships with those guys was extra special. And I think it sure meant a lot to me, and I think it meant a lot to the underclassmen too. So we're undefeated after the Cretan game, and we're going into Benilde the next week. And they were always tough. There were some tough kids over there, and I didn't know anybody who went to Benilde. It wasn't like Cretan. It wasn't like playing Cretan, but they always played us tough, and it wasn't anybody in that conference that we played, the CCC, always wanted to take a swipe at St. Thomas Academy, so they always gave us their best stuff. And so we went over there and played them there. And we beat them, I think we beat them 28-0. Kevin caught a long bomb on a play that they made up in the huddle, that he and Flutter made up in the huddle. But it was a good, they're formidable guys. They had good players, and I remember some of those guys after high school playing in the MIAC somewhere, or playing somewhere where I played with a couple guys at St. John's who were Benilde guys, and they were good, but I think we beat them pretty good that day, but that's kind of the way it was going that year. Our next game is against Hill Murray, and for the Central Catholic Conference Championship, and it's going to be the last one because the conference is disbanding. So if we beat Hill, we get to carry that title forever. And if they win, though, then not only do they break up our undefeated season, but they're going to get to claim that championship. And playing them at O'Shaughnessy, and it was tough. They were always tough. They actually were kind of more of a rival for those 3-4 years for us than Cretan, although Cretan played us pretty tough that year, senior year or junior year. But Hill was tough, and like they always are, a bunch of tough kids. And Eddie Keeger was our lineman, and he grew up with a bunch of those guys up there, and he played guard for us. And we kind of wanted to win it, especially for Eddie, too, because he knew a bunch of those guys, and we wanted to make sure that we closed that one out, and we did, And Eddie played especially great game, and he was pretty excited afterwards too. That was fun. We were all excited for him too. It was pretty cool. So our last regular season game was against De La Salle. And D was going through a pretty tough time with the football program there. I think they had 14 or 15 kids on the team. And our coach, Jerry Brown, decided that he wasn't going to play the starters. Which was great for me because I wasn't a starter, so I got to start the game, and it was fun to be in the game. But it was kind of a sign of how, a symbol really of how Jerry was understanding of where we were at versus where De La Salle was at with their programs, and that we could have run up the score and beat them by 60-0 probably, and he just didn't do that. He sat our starters, and we played. I think everybody played in that game, but it got close because they scored. We were winning 14-0, and then they scored on a play in the second half, and all of a sudden it's 14-7, and it's like, well, holy cow, we can't lose this game to these guys. So there was a little tension, but it was good. It was good for the second and third string guys to get in there and have there be something on the line there, and really we got to really give her here because D stepped up. It was great. The players on De La Salle were playing tough, and for me it was fun because I was got to play a lot in the game, and but it was cool that at the end of the game, when we shook hands, that it was it wasn't 60-0. It was 14-7. The closest game we had all year. The closest regular season game we had all year was against D. So, yeah. So the next game was our first playoff game, and it was against Burnsville down at Rosemount Stadium, which was another cool place to play down there. We had beaten Burnsville earlier in the year, and they had one out, so that's our opponent. And gosh, going into that, and you're thinking, okay, we beat those guys once, and they're really good, and it's tough to beat somebody twice. It's tough to beat somebody twice in the same year in football. In some other sports maybe, but in football it's tougher. And so there was that concern. We were ready for them. They were ready for us. You're going down there. It was a great atmosphere, unbelievable playing down there. It's 0-0. We go into overtime. And back when you'd run it from the 25 or something, you'd start at the 25 or the 10. You'd start at the 10, and then and that game I always go back remembering because I coached for a long while here after that, and we lost a couple state championship games and we lost a couple playoff games, and I remember how close we came to losing that game. It was 0-0. We go into overtime. Kevin Kelly ends up blocking a field goal that would have won the game. There would not have been another play in the overtime. He ends up blocking the field goal, or we lose the game. They win 3-0, and then we don't win the state championship. We don't get to go to Hibbing. We don't get to play St. Peter. So after Kells blocks the kick, and saves the game for us, we have to go back out to center, the center of the field, and for another coin toss to see who is going to go first and who's going to go second in the second overtime. We win the toss, take the ball, and I think on third down, we ran a play. We made up a play. We had been running kind of the same play earlier in the game, and then we kind of made up a play in the huddle, I recall. And we ran to our left. Terry Garrity, great player, great two-way player. I played with him at St. John's, phenomenal guy. Runs it in for the touchdown, and we missed the extra point, which was rare. But they get now they get the ball and they get a chance to score. And we stopped them. We stopped them on 4 plays. They went right down to the last play, and my brother Kevin chased their quarterback and made him throw the ball out of bounds or away from the receiver. And that's it. And it's mayhem because it was so tense. It was so tense. I mean, first of all, to end the game at 0-0 and in regulation, then go to the first overtime, and they're going to kick a lollipop field goal, and it's going to be over. And we block that, and then just to go out and line up again for the second overtime. Yeah, it was intense. So there was that was a pretty big celebration when we won that one. So after we beat Burnsville, we found out, I think the next day, that we got into the computer rankings. You had to be in the top 4 there. And our draw was we were going up to Hibbing. And Hibbing was undefeated. And I didn't know much about those guys. But we got to go up there. We got to play them up there. It's kind of exciting to go on the road. We went up. We stayed in the Hotel Duluth the night before, and then went over to Hibbing. I remember the fans there weren't real happy that we had white shoes. I think they thought that was not the most masculine look for our team, and they weren't real happy about that, and they gave us a pretty hard time about that. But they were good. They had some good players. They had a guy named Jay Klein who was a really good player. We had a rough and tumble game with those guys. Kevin made some big plays in that game, intercepted a pass. And we were joking about this. I think that's the only time Kevin's ever been caught from behind. The guy caught him from behind after he intercepted that pass on the near the line of scrimmage because he was playing defensive end. And the guy caught him from behind at Hibbing, and we got a pretty good chuckle out of that the other day. We were talking about that. But we ended up beating those guys 17-0, and they were good. They were really good. And but to do it up there and then the bus ride home, just the joy, we were so happy. And we knew we just beat a really good team. And it's like, okay, we got one more game, and we're state champs if we win it. So it was pretty thrilling. We were pretty excited about it, but you start getting nervous right away. It's like, okay, these guys must be pretty good too. So, but that was fun. It was fun. The road trip deal was fun, and just having all the guys in the bus and singing that school song coming down Mendota Heights Road, and yeah, that was a lot of fun. So the next week's the state championship game, and we're playing St. Peter at O'Shaughnessy Stadium, which was that's just the way the draw went with the State High School League. Was the game was going to be at O'Shaughnessy, which was great because it was our home stadium, and we loved playing there, and it was always electric there with our fans. St. Peter was really good. They were the #1 scoring team in the state. They had a bunch of guys who could really run around. I mean, they had guys who were fast. They had guys who were big. They played a read and move defense, the radar defense they called it. So it was a big week. Somebody asked me about whether or not I was focusing on school that week. It was like absolutely not. I don't think the whole school was focusing on school. I think we were all pretty focused on that game, especially the guys on the team and the coaches and stuff. But so we go in the game, and bang, they score first. Their stud running back who ended up going to Minnesota on a scholarship, Rick Lager, goes up and runs about 50 yards. And then we scored. We went back and scored. So it's tied up, and then they scored again in the second quarter. And then so we're losing going basically into halftime. It's like the last play of the half. We have the ball. We're about at midfield. And then, of course, Flutter, our quarterback, Mike Flood, and my brother Kevin made up a play basically in the huddle, and Kevin just said, "I'm just going to run a post pattern," I think, and Flutter just threw it out there, and Kevin went up and made the catch, among 3 or 4 defenders, and then ran towards the near sideline and was tiptoeing backwards down the sideline trying to stay in bounds before he got to the end zone, and then made it the end zone and fell in there. And so, it's basically we're going to tie it up. Well, then our great kicker missed the extra point. I can't remember why. I don't know if he missed it or if it was a bad snap or what happened. So now we're not winning, but it's 14-13 going into halftime. It was the last play of the half. The picture of that play was in the paper the next day, of Kevin making that grab, the catch, Ironically, there was also a picture in the paper that day of me upside down, up in the air after I tried to jump over a guy on a kickoff. So there's the 2 ends of the spectrum of the Berg boys. Is Kevin's making the catch that basically saves the game and for us, and I'm upside down in midair. So that was pretty funny when he saw that one. But so we go into the second half and we're losing, and then confident but nervous, we switched linebackers. I think we switched Joe Slater and Bob Slater. We switched sides for those guys because we had a little more size on one side and we needed a little more size on the other. And so I think at halftime we switched the linebackers, and that was pretty effective in slowing down their running game. They ran the option and they were really good at it. And that slowed them down a little bit. We picked up a fumble on I think they ran an option and on a pitch, and something happened, and Scott Wilhelmy, I think, fell in a fumble, and we got the ball and we went in and scored there, and then held on. We ran the ball a lot that game at the end there. Frank Hamill had a lot of carries. I can't even remember the number, but it was a lot. He had actually really injured his knee badly in the first half, and his dad was an orthopedic doctor, and his dad came down into the locker room and had to go over it with him, and he decided to play, but he sprained it really badly, or it popped out of joint for a minute there and went back into joint, and Frank toughed it out in the second half and had a bunch of carries, and our line did a great job, and it was like 3 yards in a cloud of dust there in the second half after we got the lead, and our defense stood up, and boy, we won it. And I'll tell you, I don't, other than personal things like the day my daughter was born and my grandkids and getting, that's the happiest I've ever been. The joy when I found Kevin, when I found my brother on the field, and the joy, we were both crying, we were holding on to each other, jumping up and down like little kids, like we were little kids. And the first team that I was on, Kevin and I were on a team together when we were probably 8 and 9 or 9 and 10, and we won the championship that year. And the last team we were on together, we won the championship that year too. And that was the most special thing for me, was because I knew the pressure that was on Kevin. He was our star guy, and he stepped up, and huge. And just to see the joy and just the sheer joy in his face, and to share that with him, and and then with the whole team. But Kevin, when I found him right away, and it was so great, and we were just so happy together, and then just all the guys just jumping up and down, like, I mean, it's something you do that nobody can ever take it away from you. you're a state champion, and you always have that. And I just, that night was wonderful. I mean, we just had so much fun, and we were just so happy, and the relief from it, and the joy from it, and the feeling of, man, we did that. We did that. We did go the extra mile in practice. There's nothing better than winning something like that with your buddies. I mean, those guys were my best friends, Mike Flood and Frank Hamill and Tim McManus and Bob Slater and Doug Wardell, and I mean, name them all. Steve Dahl, Doug, name every one of them. I don't want to leave anybody out. Mike Bradford, Tim Hernandez, John Ertl, Mike Bann. I mean, and to win it with them, to win it with your best buddies, there's something special about that you don't get in winning a college championship. And I don't think you get it in winning a professional championship. These were guys that I grew up with. And then you win that with those guys. That's extraordinary. That's different than we just put together a group of guys, and that's pretty special to win something like that. But we were just guys who grew up together, and to have that happen. But the guys, the older guys, the guys, Peter Acids of the world, the Tom Niedermeyers, the guys who I looked up to when I was a freshman, and they'd walk by in the hallway, and you're like, man, I just want to be like those guys. And then to know how close those guys got, there was a bunch from Tommy Cross and Tim Flood and, all these guys that came before us and started that, and then the guys who started it in the 60s, who started that legacy, it's like, we're going to win it for them, and then we're going to set the bar. It's been that way for 50 more years. The bar has been set there, and I was part of the coaching group that lost, a couple state championships, and it's still there. It's still there. I'm still hoping somebody can jump over it. I really do. These kids, I hope they can feel what we felt when we did it, because it was amazing. So here we are 50 years later. The joy of it is still there. The thrill of it is still there. I can still go back there sometimes and feel it. And to sit down with your buddies who were there playing with you, and my brother who was there playing with me, and my younger brothers who were in the stands watching the game, and to relive that stuff, and we still do. We still do, and it's still, there's more jokes about how slow we are now, or about who made what mistake in what game, and we josh each other a bunch. But to be able to do that with the same guys, with this same group of guys, 50 years later, and then to come here and look in the trophy case and see that trophy, and now, St. Thomas Academy is rated #1 in football in the state right now, again, and the legacy goes on. It's literally 70 years plus of this era, starting in the 60s, with Bill Ridley, and I don't know the history before that, but I know Skip McMahon and Bill Ridley and the coaches, and then all the way up through through today. It's still just the same guys striving for excellence, and it's so good that we have that marker out there that they can look at, and that we can talk to them about, and they can see it and go, yeah, you can do it. It's out there. And it's so much fun to talk about it still. It's so much fun to reminisce about it. I really hope that it happens again for these guys. I want these kids to feel what I felt that night, and what I still feel 50 years later. I want them to get that feeling.
So as we were beginning to prepare for the start of the season, and Anoka was the first team on the schedule, I was excited. I mean, that was a great time back in those days because you could play carefree, free and loose. I mean, the guys that were with me were big, were experienced, were fast, and there wasn't really a whole lot of expected of me, I didn't think. And I was excited. And when we got to that stadium, and Jerry Brown had talked about how the crowd's going to be crazy and it'll be packed in, it's kind of a sunken field. And when we got there, I was like a kid at Disney World. It was exciting. You know, there's just tons and tons of people there. And then once the game started, honestly, I mean, everything just slowed down. It was just, things would happen just as the coaches told they were. We had to respond just as we were taught to do. And it was a blast. It was just an absolute blast playing that game. After the Burnsville game, and we were 2-0, you could start to kind of sense that it was a special team. There was a lot of camaraderie, there was a lot of talent, and you could sense some momentum going. And you just, when you're playing sports, you just kind of understand when momentum's on your side, and it just felt like the momentum was starting to roll downhill for us. You know, the first time playing at St. Thomas College, as it was known back then, instead of the university, it was a cool stadium. And I can't remember all the games we played there, but one distinct memory I have is that the weather always seemed to be very good. And it was kind of a pristine field. I could have walked down to the stadium from our house, but of course, as the way the tradition is, you have to drive out to Mendota Heights first to get dressed, jump on a bus, come over, go back out to the school and stuff. But I enjoyed playing with guys that were older than me. It's what I've been doing most of my life. So I just kind of gotten used to it that you'd play the game on Friday, then go out with your buddies on Friday and Saturday. You know, the first home game we played at the academy, I don't know if it had any special meaning to me. It was just another game, but playing football was kind of the social life. I mean, it was just a lot of fun. I mean, it really was. It was football back then, at least for me, was more than just the actual game. It was the camaraderie of the community. It was the parents that would come up to you, you know, during the week or after a game, and I mean, they had every play memorized. So coming out to the academy to play a home game there, and then to follow it up with a dance at school afterwards, it was pretty special, especially since none of us could really dance. I mean, you know, you just shake it up. You know, I remember the road trip down to Lourdes, and probably even more so than the road trip and the actual game, was kind of the hype before it. I mean, you don't get that kind of a hype for a B squad game or a freshman game or a grade school game. So just kind of, you know, hearing stuff on the radio or reading stuff in the newspapers about, you know, number one team from Rochester, number one team from the metro area here, going head to head, it was kind of exciting. And you get the actual kickoff, and again, the game slows down. Better talented team, I think, prevailed, and we played a very, very good game, if memory serves me right. I just remember it was always fun to beat Cretin. You know, that was probably the toughest Cretin team that I got to play against in my 4 years at St. Thomas. I mean, they were well coached, they were talented, they hit hard. But again, I think that momentum that I mentioned earlier, it just kept on rolling. And by now, I think not only we knew we had something special going, but I think our community did, and I think some of the people that followed high school football back then knew that there was a special team that was brewing out here in Mendota Heights. I think, and I don't know what other schools had back then. I know the technology is certainly different today than it was back when we were playing, but I can tell you that the week of preparation we would have, I mean, our coaching staff did a great job of showing us and telling us what to expect from the other team, what their tendencies were, who their more dominant players were, where some of the weak points were. And from a defensive standpoint, that was really key because, you know, both Bob and I like to kind of freelance and shoot gaps when the occasion presented itself. And because you knew that they had, say, a weak right tackle or a weak left guard, you can just look for that tendency and, you know, you could exploit it almost at will. I was surrounded by an incredible group of football players. And it wasn't uncommon back then because it was a very large team, a very athletic team, that, you know, back then we played a normal 52 defense. And if I would go into a linebacker's crouch, I mean, half the time I'm not sure the offense could see where I was because our defensive front five, those guys were huge. And they would occupy all the blockers. So quite honestly, it was almost like, all the blockers are taken care of, and that running back's coming at you just naked, and all you had to do was just make sure you took him down. So I don't want to say it was easy, but it was pretty comfortable. I think the coaching staff that we had back then was an incredibly dedicated, talented group of men that really had devoted their entire lives to helping academy athletics not only just participate, but to thrive and to prosper in the environment. Jerry Brown knew the game of football as well as anybody, in my opinion, back then. But he also had a bunch of lieutenants that could break down by position what it is that had to happen, what was going to take place the day of the game. So by the time you got there, I mean, that's when I say the game slowed down. You kind of just knew what was coming, and all you had to do was react to it and go. I think that the tail end of our season, the last 3 games that we had, the competition wasn't as tough as the first half of the season, and what I can remember about it, quite honestly, isn't anything really specific other than the fact that I thought it was really classy of St. Thomas against De La Salle that we could have probably beaten them 75-0, but our coaching staff said, you know what, we're going to let the first string play 1 series, and then we're going to start playing everybody else. And I can't remember the score of the game, but I think it was fairly close. And I think that it was a classy move that we made, and I think that spoke volumes about the kind of program that we had built. The second Burnsville game, the first round of the playoffs, I believe it was, in the double overtime, that was a fun game. I still think there was the expectation that there's no way we're not going to win, but it certainly tested everybody's mettle. I mean, it was a dogfight all the way through the end. I just remember it was a hard-hitting contest, and at the end of the game, double overtime I think it was, I mean, you were just gassed. You're just gassed, and you're on the field, you're thinking just, what went down. But it was a classic, hard-fought high school football game. A lot of fun to participate in. After we beat Burnsville in that double overtime game, I think I alluded to earlier in the interview that the community was really involved in St. Thomas football. And, I mean, my parents loved it. My dad loved it. And I remember waking up the next day, and he had already had the paper out, and he was there to say, hey, you guys made the playoffs, and it looks like you're heading up north. And I'm a 15-year-old kid. I can't even drive a car. And I'm thinking, this is the coolest thing in the world. We're going to Hibbing. I have no idea how far that is or where it is, but just that we're going someplace to play football. And I was excited as heck. It was a lot of fun. The trip to Hibbing was kind of special. I don't remember a ton about it, other than the fact that, there was a night away from home. And it seemed almost like a college type atmosphere, right? You got the hotel you're going to, and you practice on the field, and but I love the fact that it was an old historic stadium. I love the fact that you had maybe 3,000, 4,000 people there, of which about 95% were rooting against you, and it just kind of motivates you. And again, if I remember right, it was a beautiful night of football, and it just seemed every night we played that year, it was just a typical, beautiful Friday or Saturday night for football. So it was just a blast to play. So the 2 most memorable games of the 1975 season for me were, the first was the opener against Sunoka, and then obviously the final, the state championship against St. Peter at St. Thomas College. And I do remember a lot of that one. That was a beautiful fall night. I remember warming up, and I mean, the stadium was packed. There's people are ringed around the track on the field, and it was just like, wow, this is really cool. And they had their bright red shirts on, I think gold pants, and you got all the hype of the game is ready to start. And I was on the kickoff team, and I remember we kick off, so you got a couple of nice little pops in, ready to get the cobwebs out of the head, and then we line up for the first snap. And I'll never forget this, and I recounted this story at an event here a couple of years ago. They used to run the wishbone. And we had been coached exactly on how this whole thing happened. You see the guard pinned down on the nose tackle, and the tackle's going out, and then the fullback's coming right at the linebacker. And they option to him, or they do whatever. So ball is snapped, everything is in slow motion, the hole opens up, and I'm thinking, I got this guy. I step in that hole, and I lower my shoulder, I'm just going to smack him right at the line of scrimmage. And the next thing I know, I'm looking up at the lights and the stars, and I got a bunch of turf in my face mask because their fullback was about 220 pounds, and he just steamrolled me. just ran over me, went for about 30 yards or something. And I'm shaking the grass off my mask and stuff. I go back in the huddle, and Bob is barking at me saying, "You're supposed to stop, you're supposed to this." And I said, "I did, he ran over me." And all I can remember is Kevin Berg just saying, "Hey, don't worry guys, we got this, everything's cool." And then Bob and I just worked out a system that we would flip-flop when we knew which side that, or I shouldn't say we knew, we kind of figured which side the play was going to. So he was much better run plugger, and I was much better at coming in on the angle pursuit. So everything worked out just fine. I think the underlying theme of the championship game as well, probably even more so the second half, was that there was never any panic. There was just a calmness of leadership that came out of, I'll say in the field is Kevin Berg, but it was also the other seniors and some of the juniors that had been around. It was like, don't worry, we got this, we'll be all right. Coaching staff was like, you know what, let's just keep on doing what's gotten us here all year. Let's play good, solid defense. Let's run the ball at them, we'll run the ball at them, and run the ball at them. And you know what? There was never a panic, I think, that I could ever sense. And I think a lot of that is a testament to the leadership that came from both players and the coaching staff. You know, as I watched the clock ticking down to end that game, I've never put it into words as to what it kind of felt like, but it was really like a kid going to Disney World. I mean, this is what you worked for all year. It's a beautiful night. You got a packed house. You've put in all the work, even though work is the wrong choice of words because it's just nothing but fun. And when that thing went off, it was like, hey, this is really cool. And we're running around, and you got the cheerleaders hugging you, got fans hugging you, got your player buddies hugging you. I mean, it was just a surreal moment. You know, the 75 season, and I would say actually my entire 4 years at St. Thomas, and I probably didn't know it much at the time, but I think it taught me a very valuable life lesson, which is that you cannot control the outcome of what comes from your efforts, but you can control the effort. And so as I've gotten older, as I did a lot of coaching myself, it was always about stressing the effort. And if you put the effort in, the results will come. So it's kind of a good lesson I learned back in high school, and one that at 65 years old I'm still hanging on to.